Recorded live from the mats of Radical MMA in New York City. The Martial Culture Podcast. Your source for in-depth combat sports and martial arts insights with Coach Rene and Matt Peters. Ring the bell and let's get it on.
Yo.
Hey.
How's it going?
Fantastic.
We're back at it again.
We are.
2 weeks in a row. We're making a hot streak. No, did you cancel last week?
Yeah, well,
you sons of a bitch.
I was away. I was doing a seminar.
Oh, that's right. You were busy in Toronto.
Yes,
busy boy.
Teaching some rack guard stuff to all my friends in Toronto.
Beautiful.
It was fantastic.
Was it a good time?
It's great. It's the year of the rat. So, got to be on that rack guard.
Yeah. Tell people about it. So we got some great stuff happening.
Fantastic.
We got people calling in. We got people in studio. We got people in the control room. We got people across the street. We got people everywhere. But more importantly, we got somebody in the studio. Let's get to it.
Yes. Please, I would love for you to introduce yourself, Karyn. Karyn and I have known each other for almost coming on 3 years now in the fight game, and I'm so happy that we have worked together. She's always been the venue we've chosen over others to develop our fighters. Do you mind introducing yourself and talking about Premier FC and your background?
Yeah, my name's Karyn Wesch. I started Premier with $500 on a dream back in 2009. And, like Rene said, I've been developing fighters. I'm a matchmaker. So I've been building amateurs into pros up into the UFC. And I've worked with Rene's, fighters for the last 3 years. We had started with UG, who started as an amateur and is pro now. And, we've had guys like Mike Perry who've come through our cage in the UFC, Ricardo Funch. We've had great partners with a lot of the coaches in Western Massachusetts, and now we've expanded. We've had people coming internationally as well. So
that's fantastic. And as we were saying in the cab ride up here, I had worked with a number of different promoters, and I can honestly say, and I've said this on the podcast many times, there's no one I work with that is as good as you. You are absolutely phenomenal. And one of the things that I really appreciate is how much you care about helping fighters achieve their dreams. You're not just here in for a buck like so many other promoters. We're always talking about how we can make the fighters grow, how to challenge them enough, but not destroy them, keeping them healthy, and just being a supportive part of that process, which is so rare. And it's just always a joy working with you. And, really excited about the Premier FC coming up, the 29th, February 29th. Yes. Yeah. This is a huge event. And it's a great card. But let's go. How did you get interested in fighting to begin with? Like, what did you train martial arts or?
No. I didn't. My mom had an entrepreneur, and, when the UFC bought Pride, I watched it on the financial side go from like a $900,000 company up to like a multi-million-dollar company overnight. And who wouldn't want to try to be part of that? So I created a clothing line and called Need to Bleed Fightwear. And I started going from school to school, and I would pick up fighters and I would say, I'll sponsor you and I'll sponsor you. And, over a few years, I started studying the sport, and I, became a fight manager so I could start managing fighters and really see like, like you just said, there's a lot of issues with fighters and being on the safe side where promoters will bring them in and get them, you're the opponent. They bring them in to get beat up for the ticket seller.
Yeah.
So I, worked with some of the worst and some of the best. And then I decided to start my own league in 2009. And,
I know you were involved in the Massachusetts fight community a little closer to Boston originally, right?
I was in Springfield, Massachusetts. I actually built American Fight Team back in like 2006, 2007. I went from, kind of getting to know the ropes for a few years to having 29 pro fighters under my belt.
Wow.
I worked with some great people.
Do you still manage fighters too?
No, in 2009, 2010 is when officially Massachusetts became sanctioned. I was actually the first promoter under the sanctioning body in Massachusetts. So when I did that, I actually had to physically at the board table, physically sign off all of my fighters that they were no longer under contract with me.
Oh, because like a conflict of interest kind of thing.
It is a conflict of interest, yeah. Mm-hmm. So legally, I cannot be a fight manager. And, once you get into this side of the sport, I don't want my fighters. I don't want to match my fighters. What I want to do is I have all of them. They're all babies to me.
Yes.
And I always match a fight. I imagine their mothers in the front row, and would this be the right fight for them? And would she be okay with that? So I stopped managing fighters and then started Premier, and it's kind of been a whirlwind since. So. Yeah.
And I know you walked into my academy. Yeah, it was about 3 years ago, and you said,
During a snowstorm.
That's right. It was a crazy snowstorm. And you're like, oh, so you're in an MMA academy. And I'm like, who is this person?
It was like blind walk in.
It was. I actually, believe it or not, I came here to look at a venue, and I'm a country girl, to be honest. I'm not a New Yorker. I don't, I have tobacco in my backyard, like for miles and miles. So I came in and I couldn't get the subways. They were shutting down the subways because of the snowstorm.
Right.
And I was looking for a place to eat. And his academy was just the brightest thing on the street. Everything else was closed. So I walked in, because I was freezing. And he welcomed me. And I said, wow, you're an MMA academy. And then we kind of built a relationship from there.
Yeah, and it was funny because my natural inclination is to distrust promoters. And it's like a more adversarial relationship, and I have never, from the first minute I met Karyn to today, I've never felt that ever. We're just wonderful working together, and just happy to be part of the Premier FC family. But did you, in your growth of the company, I know you had some highs and lows, and how did it grow to the size you are today? Because now it's an extremely well-respected promotion. But I know it probably didn't start out that way. How did you get it off the ground, and how did you get started in terms of developing it?
So,
and I know you're going international soon. We know that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
and so amazing. Part of it was getting a respect as a woman, as a promoter, is kind of a little bit, it's a little edgy. I didn't have a lot of issues with fighters and building relationships with coaches, because they really wants to know who was the guy behind the scenes, and so once I got past all of that, I really started making it a business. There's two separate businesses. There's fighting, and then there's promotions. And when you separate those two, it's really easy to work with coaches and work with managers, because now that's one side of the business. But then there's the promotional side, which is the TV and all of the other stuff. So, I was able to compartmentalize the business and then be able to run it effectively. And it's not like me. I mean, I have great people that work with me. It's a team of people.
Fantastic.
For sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I wake up and it's not like I just own Premier. I'm with a group of people that, I was the glue for them. I picked specific people that I knew were really good at what they do, and I don't have to micromanage. So, this group of people has built us to what we are today. So, I can't take credit for Premier. I could just take credit for being the glue of Premier that put the great people together that work.
But I think that's true of any entrepreneur. It's one of the skills of an entrepreneur is bringing the right people together and creating an environment where they can work together harmoniously. And that's a very difficult skill. I think it's also kind of a skill of how you run an academy too, bring the right knowledge in and how everybody moves the work, different pieces, how they interact and how they work smoothly together. And you're not just the glue, but you're also the oil that lubricates everything too, I think, And
like you said, sometimes you'll get somebody that walks into your school and, you start training with them and you're knocking heads with them because either they don't like your training style or they know more than you do. That's always a famous one.
Oh, yeah.
But for me, when I meet someone, I could tell in my gut. Like when I met you, I knew that I was going to have a great working relationship with you because you're inviting. It's just your personality is inviting. So for myself, I kind of live the same way with Premier that, when I start working with people, there's coaches I will not work with because I know that wholeheartedly they're just throwing their fighters in and they're not ready. And, it's great to have some, the guy on the card, but that's not going to do anything for me and that's not going to do anything for the fighter. So, in building your gym or in me building a promotion, I think it's really important to keep your values and what you believe is the next step for you and not to compromise on it.
That's amazing. And that's so rare. And it's also why I respect you so much.
Thank you so
integrity,
much.
Values, and, commitment to the sport rather than money. Mm-hmm. You're amazing.
Thank you.
Well, speaking of good people that are the glue of an organization and fighters that are ready to fight, we have somebody on the line we can talk to now.
Hey, G.
Hey, Coach. How's it going?
Not bad. Karyn's here as well, and Matt, my producer. Just could you introduce yourself and also talk about your upcoming fight? And Karyn, you can introduce the title match as well. Set it up. I know he's fighting for what title?
How you doing, G?
How's it going, Karyn? I'm
good. So, UG will be fighting for my middleweight title against Pat Casey, on February 29th, in Springfield.
Awesome. So put all my money on you, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I know, and Pat Casey. Pat Casey, 100%.
I mean, I got to make a good call. If you tell me you're not going to win, let me know.
And we're really honored to fight Pat, because he's a warrior. He's a competitor. I have nothing but respect for him. But G, tell us about your background and how you got started and this road. I mean, I know, but nobody else does, this road to fighting for a very, very prestigious pro title, the title that Mike Perry held at one point.
But first, how's your stomach after all the food you ate yesterday? I saw your Instagram.
Wait, what?
Uh-oh. Am I spilling some information that Rene doesn't know?
The promoter's here, and it's in less than 4 weeks.
What are you doing?
Well, I saw a picture of the food. I didn't see him eating it, so there's no evidence he ate it.
Long scale says 185 on February 28th. Everything's fine.
Beautiful.
All right, go ahead. Tell us about yourself, Mr. G.
Sure. I first got into MMA just because I saw it on TV and thought it was cool. So, yeah. I first started in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu right after college, just because, like I said, I saw it on TV and I thought it was cool, and I wanted to try it out. And then for the first few years, I was kind of just training on and off. And then the last few years that I've been here in New York training with Rene, I took it a lot more seriously. I always kind of had it in the back of my mind that I wanted to fight. And then just as my skills progressed, it just seemed like the natural evolution. It wasn't even so much I wanted to fight. It just felt like, you're going to go on this journey. Like you kind of want to see it to the end. So I felt like an obligation to myself to push myself to compete. And so far it's been going great. Been fighting at Premier for the last couple of years. Been great experiences every single fight. The promotion's been wonderful. All my opponents were, good, tough guys. But I'm really, really excited to fight Pat Casey because I know, he's a good, well-rounded fighter. He's very durable, and I think it'll be a chance to show off all of my skills. I've been working on plenty of stuff that I want to flex a little bit. So I'm pretty excited for this fight.
Yeah. And people don't know, but G used to be a professional gambler as well. So he comes from a lot of another sport. And how long were you gambling for?
For basically kind of when I started jiu-jitsu, during college, I was a professional poker player. I was very much, analytics based and like math based, and that's kind of something I take into my fighting as well. I try to be, try to fight smart. I try not to like bang it out or flip coins because even if you're a more skilled fighter, like there are just certain situations where it doesn't matter how good you are, you're kind of like rolling the dice a little bit, and I try not to be in those situations unless I absolutely have to be. And then hopefully we put ourselves in strong situations. Our skill advantage will, in the end, give us a favorable result. And that's kind of something from my gambling days that I've always worked towards, just finding the area where you have the biggest edge possible and exploiting those advantages.
Yeah. I think just on a personal level, I think why we gel so much is because we both have a very analytical approach to fighting. And I'm not saying I'm the best coach in the world, but I definitely, Professor Ken, myself, we're always, crunching the data.
Rene, you are the best coach in the world.
Well, thank you, G. That means a lot. I know you're just trolling me, but thank you. I'm honored to be your teacher. But anyway, so I'm super excited for the fight. Pat Casey, for the guys who don't know, he has a storied career in Bellator and also in Premier FC. And we've actually shared the back room with him. He is one tough fighter. And he's also from your background, Karyn, right? I mean, from your backyard. So you've seen him grow as well.
Yeah, actually, he was one of my amateurs who turned pro. I work very closely with Bellator. I match for them when they are up here in the Northeast. So, I've definitely had a hand in getting him to Bellator as well. And even coming back here, I think not every fighter has the same business plan. Some fighters never even want to get out of the Northeast. They don't want to get out regional. Most fighters want to go to the UFC. Less than half will ever make it there. I do believe that Pat has the heart to get there. I've been waiting I wanted G and Pat to fight as amateurs at one point. I don't know if you remember that. That was right at the beginning, when Pat was back and forth and fluctuating weight. And so I knew at some point that they were going to fight pro, but I could not make it line up. Those stars were not going to line up. And when they finally did, I was so excited. I've been waiting for this fight for the last 2 years.
Yeah. And, how do you see it? How do you see it going, Karyn? How do you see it going in terms of strengths that G brings and strengths that Pat Casey brings?
So I think that what's really awesome is that they're both extremely well-rounded. Pat, I think, he likes to stand. He definitely does, but see, G does too. I've definitely, the last fight I watched G on the ground, and I've watched him improve. Again, I've watched him on his first fight up till now. And, I've seen his ground improve tremendously. Where G, I feel like, where he used to back up and stand up, he now moves forward. I think that they're both moving forward fighters. They're not stand and wait fighters. I do see possibly G being a little more aggressive in the beginning of the fight than Pat. I think Pat likes to feel out his opponent a little bit more. So, I think that stylistically, they're the perfect match because they do really, they do mirror each other a lot in their fight style. But I definitely think there's going to be fireworks on this fight. I mean, I would be thrilled. I hope this fight doesn't go one round. I would be thrilled to see a minimum of 3 rounds go through this fight. But I do not see this fight going to decision.
All right. G, what do you think, is the biggest strength that you bring into this fight?
I think my biggest strength is probably just like I'm a threat everywhere. So you kind of just have to watch out for everything.
Yeah. So you're just basically the best fighter ever. You're just the best fighter.
Whoop, whoop.
That's my strength.
I mean, I'm pretty confident in my skills.
Good.
And I think, Pat's a great fighter, but I think I do have the skill edge in a lot of positions. And as long as nothing crazy happens, I feel like I'll be in pretty good shape.
I can say from the last fight you did from the fight before that, I've noticed a big difference in his conditioning too, where, I think I knew when he fought, in Massachusetts, he was under. I could see at the end of the fight, he was winded. And after his last fight, I noticed his conditioning. It's almost like every fight he picks something that, okay, he doesn't go back with a win and he's just happy with it. I think he looks at what he's done and where he feels like here are some gray areas in his game. And, I did notice myself personally from one fight to the next that his cardio and, it seemed to increase tremendously.
Exciting. Do you have a game plan? Like you guys have the whole fight mapped out?
We do.
So what is that? Explain to me in detail.
We're not talking. But G, what round do you think you're going to finish him in?
I like to go home as early as possible.
No, not the first. No.
Okay. On that note, thanks so much for calling in, G. And I hope everybody can see you fight. I'm so proud of you.
Can they still buy tickets?
Yeah, we can still buy tickets, and we'll put the link to buy tickets on the Martial Culture podcast page. And anybody, you can also watch it. Is it going to be live streamed, this one?
Yes, it'll be live streamed on Fight TV, as well as if anyone wants to get tickets, they can either go to your website, or you can go to premierfighting.com. I would suggest using UG as a code, and then he gets credit. So he actually makes money on his own ticket sales too.
Great. Also, we have one other fighter calling in. I don't know who this guy is. His name's Yorrick. So G, I'm going to say goodbye, and we have the other title fight coming up. So G, thanks for taking time to be on with us today, and
good luck.
I know we talk about this in the gym all the time, but I'm so happy to be part of your martial journey, and I'm so proud of you, buddy.
Thank you.
So we have another fight on the card for a title. This one's an amateur title, and would you mind setting it up, Karyn?
Sure. We have Yorrick Anderson will be fighting Zach Richards for the 150 45-pound title. Wow, that was really like, I went blank for 1 second. You know why? You know what? It was actually Yorrick's fault that happened, because Yorrick was like, I'm sitting at 125. And I was like, 125? What? So he's fighting for our 45-pound title. 145-pound title.
Yeah. And Yorrick has been actually on this podcast before, but Yorrick, just we're really glad to talk to you again. And before we talk to you, though, let's what do you see? How do you know more about Zach Richards than we do? But what's his background? And he's also from the Massachusetts area. Or is he from somewhere else?
No, he's actually from Maine.
Oh, he's from Maine.
Yeah.
Oh.
Mm-hmm. So I just actually watched Zach. I did history on him before I matched the fight. He was actually fighting when I matched the fight that he's going into now. So I actually kind of sat cage side at his last fight. A friend of mine does shows over at Mohegan Sun. So I sat kind of cage side going, oh, he has to win this fight. But he's definitely a strong fighter. He's a stand-up fighter for sure. Yorrick is definitely a stand-up fighter. I mean,
don't count on that.
I know. I'll just say he's a stand-up thus far. I mean, he's actually all over the highlight video of him kicking his opponent in the head. So, again, stylistically, it used to be where MMA would, you would take either you had a ground guy and a stand-up guy. There wasn't a lot of mixed martial arts schools. It was, so, the awesome part about matching right now, and especially guys like Yorrick and guys like UG, is that they're so well-rounded that it's easy for me to match them. So where do I think this fight will go? I don't know. I do know that both of them are powerful in the first round. Both of them. They of course everyone likes their reach, but they both love that initial bell. You could see it in both of them. So
Yorrick, what's your take on the fight? And are you excited? And you must be. I mean, it's for your first title, so you must be really, really excited. Just give us your 2 cents on this upcoming battle.
Well, to correct you on one thing, Karyn, I said 225 pounds.
Oh, did you?
And that is an accurate measurement right there. That's
225. Wow, that must have been a big Super Bowl.
I think he's like 202, but I think he's pushing it a little bit. He likes pizza, though.
Last time I saw you a couple weeks ago, you didn't look that bad.
Wow, that just looked very different today in training.
The rash guard's a little tight, makes me look like black is very slimming, you know? Black today.
Wow.
So that's funny. If you want to jump up a couple weight classes, we can do that too.
Sure.
How are you seeing this fight, and are you excited? And not in terms of your opponent, but just the opportunity to fight for the title and everything like that.
I'm really excited to fight, period. Again, I'm looking forward to fighting additional rounds. Like this one's a 5-rounder, which I've never done before, so that's exciting. We're working really hard on my conditioning, running 90 miles every day with UG on my back. So really looking forward to showing that off.
You forgot me on your back as well. You got UG on one shoulder and me on the other.
Is it Return of the Jedi?
Yes, yeah. He's using his force.
He's a powerful 145.
I'm a little too heavy for you, I know.
we're all heavyweights at Radical.
Including Jeff Lau.
We'll talk about that later. So.
But so you're excited. How do you see the fight going?
Like I said before, he's a very tough guy. I've spoken to him in person. Super nice. Not in person, but I've spoken to him one-on-one. Very nice person. Likes to scrap. I'm a very nice person. I like to scrap. I don't see any quitting him. There's absolutely no quitting me. So either way, there's going to be fireworks.
Yeah, for sure. It's going to be a great, great fight. I'm super excited, and it's just really great to see you finally fighting for a title, because I think you deserved a title shot. I mean, of course, everybody has to earn it, but I knew you were a champion from the moment I met you. So now it's just trying to wrap the belt around your waist,
Yes, sir.
And what are the other fights? Thank you so much, Yorrick. What are the other fights on the card that I don't want to just dominate with Radical fighters, but there's a lot of this stack card. I mean, there's some heavyweights fighting on that card that are amazing. So you do want to talk about some of the other fights coming up?
Yeah. So we have 12 pro fights and 7 amateur fights. So it's a very stacked card. One that I'm pretty excited about is, I have, now I'm going to go, this can totally draw a blank on my fight card now. I have Steve Stengel coming back. He was one of the most, he's a pro. When I think back in my own career, any fight that would actually stop me and go like, wow. He fought someone I had brought in from Brazil, Gustavo Kuhn, and it was right around the time where he kind of just dipped out. But this was one of the most powerful pro fights that it was my first most powerful pro fight I ever seen in person that close. And I was shocked. And so he's been out, like I said, of the game for about 4 years. And I contacted him about 8 months ago and said, you got to get back in. Like, he's a country boy doing his country thing, and was like, Massachusetts is very expensive to fight in, with the medicals. And he just kind of like, I'm done. So I was able to, in the last 8 months, he came back, strong. He is absolutely ready to fight. And he's fighting Nick Alley. Nick Alley has actually fought for me for years. He was in my amateur ranks, and then he went up through my pro. He has 9 pro fights now, I think. And, so when I think, again, stylistically, both of them are very powerful fighters. So I'm very excited about that fight. We also actually do grappling, which is, something new that we added, and we added it because of the want for it in our local area. We have Naga, but the want to see people on fight night grapple was a big deal. So we actually have a little girl who's only 10 years old. She is the mini Ronda Rousey. It's so difficult to match her even in grappling. Because
what's her weight class?
She's 95 pounds.
I have a girl at 105.
It would be awesome if you want to bring her. She's matched right now.
Oh, okay. Next
she's
time.
13 years old.
Yeah.
Her name's Daniele. Her first name's Gia Daniele. She kickboxes. So you see this online, and she literally, when I look at her, I think if I could just squeeze down Ronda Rousey, she is so powerful. She trains 6 hours a day. So, we're adding little things. It's against the law for us to actually have it. And I personally, in my own opinion, don't think people should fight in a cage, until they are 18 years old. I think that's just I think they're still growing up to that point. So, everyone has their own opinions in boxing and MMA. My personal opinion is I think that MMA fighters should not fight in the cage until they're 18, but it is nice to be able to bring her in the cage and her to be able to have that experience.
Just have a grappling match, not an MMA match.
Just a straight grappling match, but it gives them some opportunities to get what that feels like. So when they are older, there's not the new beginning. As you know, with your fighters, you have a fighter who's an amateur right now. He's going to come in the cage. Of course, they're nervous. They've never been in front of 2,000 people before in their shorts. When a mouthpiece with someone who wants to rip their face off across the cage, it's a big deal. So I think that having them in the cage earlier and younger. So we do that in the beginning of the night.
No, that's great. It's funny because I'll tell you, the very first time I fought in front of a crowd, I was like, what? It had nothing to do with my opponent.
That you were a fighter too. I forgot.
And Yorrick, you fought, the Sandat championships as well. What was the first time you fought at Madison Square Garden too? What was the first time it was like fighting for you in front of a really big crowd? Did it throw you off a little bit, or did you just something aside? I know for me personally, the minute I saw this huge crowd, I was like, what? Yeah. But how did you deal with the getting used to being in front of an audience?
I'm going to guess he likes being in front of a crowd.
Yeah,
you got me.
I'm not gonna lie. The bigger the crowd, the better my performance normally.
Wow, really?
Madison Square Garden, not a care in the world. Fighting in a hotel in Orlando, Florida. I'm like, oh, this is a little scary. Crowd doesn't really bother me too much, especially if I'm in my shorts. I actually prefer that.
Oh, wow. That's great. I envy you. That's one thing you have that, I envy. You come in with such tremendous mental strength. And, there's so many issues that fighters have to deal with aside from the technique. And I said it before when last time you were on the podcast, it's like, you have all the ancillary attributes aside from fighting skill. And of course you have the fighting skill. So I personally know that the sky's the limit for you, and I'm super excited for this fight. But, I would say that unfortunately I was not blessed with so many such mental strength. And for me, the very first time I went in front of a very big crowd, which is it wasn't like 2,000 people, but it was sizable. It definitely threw me for a loop, and I had to kind of go back into my little Zen space and and try to get through it, you know? But then once I got hit in the face, I'm like, oh, okay.
I couldn't do it. I definitely couldn't do it. There's no way. I mean, I get in my own cage and I'm in a skirt and they give me the microphone for a second and I think I would never be able to do what these guys do. I mean, I did boxing for 5 minutes. I got hit in the face, broke my nose first time, never did it again. For
bad luck.
It was. And he was like 15 years old. I'm like, no, he didn't. Like I can't hit you. You're just a kid. And then he broke my nose, and I was like,
talk to his mother.
Now I have problems. I may hit a 15-year-old. But I agree. I can't imagine getting into that position where I would have that. You're nervous, but now you have to fight.
Yeah.
So being new, I can see that.
I just want to swing a little bit away from Premier FC and also talk about the larger MMA community and promoters and just the promotion business in general. And the UFC, the MMA business in general, because as I said, you're a promoter who I respect tremendously, and there's other ones that I've dealt with that's not been so positive. And how do you see the larger fight community, and how do you evaluate it, either on the highest level, the lower levels? I'm just curious what your take is on it. I know, people are very critical of the UFC, particularly when it came to Conor McGregor and all his activities. And then they kind of use that as a promotional space. And then there's ONE FC, which is really move away from the razzle dazzle and just focus on good fights, and selling the product, where the UFC is, since they, have the ESPN deal, they're a little bit more pushing the drama. And then there's of course Bellator, which, is definitely trying to have marquee guys like Fedor come back. And fighter safety can be an issue when you're an older fighter. And also I'm sure there's some deals in terms of, financial compensation, things like that I'm not privy to, but I'm just wondering what your take is, because of course you see so much more than I do. And, I'd like to pick your brain on what goes on behind the scenes in the larger shows like Bellator that you said you worked with. Maybe you see, or you've heard what happens in the UFC or any show, and also on the lower level, what you see is going right and what's going wrong.
So, I remember it was about 2.5, 3 years after I started. I thought I knew everything, of course. I think most people do when they start a business. And I actually met with Dana White in, New Jersey. And I thought I was the bomb, told him like, this is what I've done. And he literally looked at me and said, when you've actually done something, let me know. And I was like, wow. So that's where I started studying the sport, the business side of the sport. And the business side of the sport, just because the UFC is the biggest doesn't mean that they make all the right decisions. And so what I've noticed with the UFC, where their biggest mistake was when they took the ability for fighters to make money. Fighters make a lot of money as sponsors with their sponsors.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
The Reebok deal was
and
just
it was
such a mistake.
It was such a mistake. And I mean, some of these fighters that were making $400,000 a year are now making like $5,000 a year in sponsorship. They can make them outside, but they don't have a platform anymore. And I think that again, with business, Bellator monopolized on that. That was the moment when Bellator was like, we're in it to win it. And, not to knock the UFC, because again, these are things that they've been the number one, the big cheese for so long. They think that these are the right decisions. What Bellator did was they gave back the ability for fighters. So you'll see a lot of fighters come out of the UFC and right into Bellator.
And make way more money.
They're making way more money. And it's not necessarily from the league. It's because they have a platform. They have a fan base, an audience that they can make money on it. And of course they would. So, I think from the UFC level down to the Bellator level, I do see, and I've spoken a lot to the matchmakers and the promoters for them. So, we're all here for ultimately the same reason, is that's to grow fighters. I will never be Bellator. I will never be the UFC. I will be a feeder to those people. Not because I don't have big aspirations of being as big as the UFC. I think if I was a little girl looking up, of course that's what I'd want. But, to safely get them there and ready. That is another, and that's where the issue is at the level, like you said, with the other promoters, is they're in it for a paycheck. They're in it for money. A lot of them. I'm not going to say all of them. But what happens is they end up padding these local guys just because they sell tickets and they're making money, et cetera. And then what happens is they go to the UFC or they go to Bellator and they fail.
Yeah. That's so common.
And there is a very dirty side to this sport that I hate, that I've been privy to and I've seen, but sometimes it only takes one, and I can only be one. in my sport too.
Wouldn't the UFC or Bellator stop coming to you for fighters at that point if you're giving them fighters that aren't ready?
No, they don't, because what happens is, there's a lower level. So when they had, and he, like you were saying about the drama side of it. So, the UFC used to do the house. You remember the UFC house where they would bring them in?
Ultimate Fighter.
Yeah. And they would bring them into the house. The issue is that they were starting to make the fighters make them have drama. And so some of the fighters, I actually set one of my fighters there at the time. In the beginning of that was when one of my fighters was dropping in weight and I was getting him into the Ultimate Fighter. And he wanted to leave right when he got there. He said, I will never act like that in public. He was fresh out of Brazil, knew very little English. He said, I will never do some of the things that they don't make you do it, but they say, if you want a name, it's how you build your name. But again, that's the promotional side. We talked about the fight side and the promotion side. So, with the UFC now, which what I do appreciate is they do UFC Fight Pass. So
and the Contender Series
and the Contender Series, right?
I think it's almost a better way of just they go to showcase better, right? And yeah, I didn't mind the Ultimate Fighter when it started, but then it turned into such a
breaking windows and
reality circus TV, and but when it very first started, I didn't mind it at all. But then it turned into something. It turned into TV, not martial arts.
Well, I felt like it started making people look at fighters as if they were some kind of other breed, an animal breed almost. Yeah. And we have doctors, we have all levels of fighters, and they have great personalities. They have families, their fathers, their mothers. And I think when it started to get to that point, we started looking at fighters a little bit differently, and they deserve a respect.
Absolutely.
They train every
MMA
day.
is the sport league with the highest number of graduate degrees of people fighting. I'm talking bachelor's, but also master's degrees. Mm-hmm. And G is an MBA, and he's working for a very high level, accounting firm. So, and a lot of my fighters, are very, very well educated. And I think it's very important. And Yorrick is a brilliant person outside of martial arts.
Right. And I think when the UFC started doing that and pushing that more, they realized they were making a mistake. Again, if you're the top of the food chain, we're kind of looking up to you. You're going to make mistakes. You have to fix those mistakes. So when they started, like you said, with the Contender Series, they're actually a developmental league. So if you win that, it does not mean you're in the UFC. And
like William Knight, who came up through Premier FC.
Right. So William Knight, I actually brought William Knight, who's this little kid. I felt like now that I look at him back at it, but brought him to his first radio show before his very first amateur MMA fight. He went all through amateurs and his pros, and and now he's in the developmental program with the UFC. And what that does is there's certain leagues that are under developmental contracts. They call them UFC Fight Pass. You see UFC Fight Pass. So what he did was he went and fought for the Contender. Say there was 12 fighters or that won on that. That doesn't mean that they're in the UFC, and that doesn't mean they get a developmental contract. Then at that point, Dana White will decide who goes into the developmental contract. When they do, they can no longer fight for anyone who's not covered under the UFC Fight Pass. So he can't come home and fight right now, because as of right now, I'm not under a developmental contract with UFC.
Is that something you would want to do in the future?
Or, for sure. Yeah, like that'll be my goal for the latter end of 2020, is to at least go under a developmental contract with the UFC, so we can do UFC Fight Pass, where these guys like William could come in and be. But again,
he's fighting in CFFC now, or is that where he's fighting?
No, he fought for CFX or CES.
CES, right?
Yeah. That's and so he just actually won his fight. But I speak to his manager often. He's got a lot of fighters that are actually in the UFC, and the UFC can decide, we're done today, and he's done, and he goes back. It doesn't mean he's a UFC fighter. This is an example with the developmental leagues is like CES was always just CES. Now, if you go there and say their title holder wins a belt, it's still a CES belt. It's not a UFC belt. Right. They only use them as a developmental stepping stone, so
right, but it's a great shot. It's sort of like the baseball has the different AAA, AA, and I think that's a great way to develop fighters, because in martial arts has belts, and I think the origin of belts was originally to gauge skill so that you don't have mismatches. And when you have these developmental leagues, each step is, and the same with boxing, you have novice class, then you have open class amateur, and then you have pro, and you go into these different weight classes so you don't get put into the deep end of the pool where you can't survive. Obviously, like we said, sometimes people pad records or something like that, but there's still that system, that structure is very, and that's one thing I noticed in Japan. Japan has the Shuto organization, and they have a great system. They have class 1, class 2, and class 3 amateurs. And then they have pro, and you have to go through each step and have a number of wins in each step before you go to the next. And it's run completely throughout Japan. It's a national amateur organization. I've never seen a better, more organized, more non-corrupt. I mean, there's no corruption in the Shuto League. Not in Japan. I'm talking about the Shuto League, but there's zero corruption and there's real standards, and the grassroots developmental league that they have there is very good and really keeps people safe. At least I can speak when I lived there, which was numbered many years ago, but still, as I follow the scene and I know that the fighters that they bring, because almost all the Japanese fighters are coming up through that league that are good, and they're developing. It's too bad that MMA is not as popular in Japan as it was. But still, that grassroots structure exists there to keep fighters safe and give them the right challenge at the right time is a wonderful thing. It seems like the UFC is kind of trying to develop that, and I really, really like that. And it's so important to have leagues like you. And you said, oh, you don't want to necessarily be the UFC, but there's a very important role to play. When G had his first amateur fight, I came to you. I mean, what other venue would I have to go? I'd have to go to some other venue with some sleazy, awful promoters. I mean, look, I fought a Valley Tudo fight on a carpet with a rug put over it in freaking, I won't say where it was, but it was here in New York. But anyway, I fought on a carpet with a rug put over it, and there's a concrete floor, a parquet wood concrete floor underneath it. It was so unsafe and so crazy.
You got rug burns from that?
I was going to say.
I actually, you know what? When we were fighting, that was the thing, is like there was an edge where the floor ended, where the carpet ended and the hard floor began, and you couldn't see because they put the sheet on the floor. So you couldn't see where it ended. So what people were trying to do was aim for past where the rug ends to smash the guy's head on that concrete.
That is so sad.
And it was a bunch of Russians, looking at us and we're like, yeah. And I mean, like, where do you go if you want to test yourself? And G said it, and I know Yorrick is the same. We're looking to test ourselves as martial artists and grow as martial artists. And we need those venues. We need the right venue at the right time. And, I went in, with what was called the Underground, and it was in New York, and that was actually amazingly well run show, which was very safe. It was underground, and it was not, we're at this point where we weren't sure if it was legal or not, but it was run by a guy named Peter Storm and another who really matched fighters up.
Was it in a church?
We was everywhere. We fought everywhere.
No, I think I went to the actual show.
Yeah,
underground.
No, it was actually most of the time it was either in a boxing gym, sometimes it's underground. We had one was a martial arts school that was a B1 floor. We fought in a lot of, we fought at Fight House once. That was one of my first fight for them. And then, which was a martial arts school here in New York City, but they fought many places. And the thing about Peter Storm, and I shout out to Peter, is that he was always concerned about fighter safety. And he had many people of different skills, because anybody who wanted to test themselves, they could come on. But he would say, what's your skill? What's your background? He'd look at them, and he would, and I could say that very, very few people got injured on that show. I have to say though, and Peter's gonna laugh, the worst injury he got on that show was someone I injured. But anyway, that's another story.
You're brute.
Yeah.
I think actually though, as a story, if I can remember correctly, he fought a guy who was like 100 pounds more
50.
than you.
I fought one, but that was not Peter Storm's show. But
right,
I fought once with a guy who was 50 pounds heavier than me.
That would never, never happen in my state for sure.
And so, and I also fought in this tournament where the guy was, there was one guy, was like basically open weight class, and the guy was 35 pounds heavier than me, and he was very well trained, and he'd actually already fought in the, not Naga, but Naga is the same organization, but they have the MMA shows.
That's reality.
Reality fighting, yes. He had fought in reality fighting. He had experience. And then he was 35 pounds heavier than me. And I was 155, and he was he was like 180, 185, something like that. Yes. Or 190, actually. I think he was somewhere on there. But he was about 35 pounds heavier than me. And So it was a big weight difference.
And, they definitely can't do that. And I do want to touch base.
It was it was dangerous. And now that we have people like you, it's great that we have just the right place. Like I had to search for fights, and that you have that opportunity for people to fight is fantastic in a place where people care about you. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but that was great.
Well, part of, I think, in going back to the UFC and the decisions that they make is one of the best decisions that they made was this developmental league. It's because it's so mainstream now. There's so many fighters. How do you get into the UFC? Like there's, 2,000 fighters trying to get one spot in the UFC. And so they have to, it's not just, it's the growth of the sport. They have to make changes as time goes on. It's not like this is the perfect way to do it and this is how we do it now. I think that it's a forever evolving thing because of the amount of fighters there are. And the UFC, when they make it a little bit easier for us in some ways, only because, they'll say, this is what we're looking for. And now we as matchmakers can groom fighters to say, well, if you're ever really going to get there and make a difference, this is the kind of fighter you have to fight. I have to make a business plan for every fighter that steps in my cage. If you want to get to the UFC and you're right here, these are the fighters that you need to get, in the next year or 2 years. But if you fight this guy, the top guy now, I'm never going to be able to match you. But
that was always interesting because you said that to me many times. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, I never thought of that. It was like, if you fight the top guy right now, nobody else is going to want to fight you.
Because I remember you said, you're like, bring it on, and I'm like, no, because I still have to continue to match him. And the UFC needs people with a record. And if you want to go to the UFC, and part of that is you have to trust the people that you work with. Yeah. Because, the coach, again, where your fighters can come, but see, I'm in a different side of the sport. So I see where they can go, but I know how to get them there only with, if you fight these 5 fights, you can get in the UFC because you have these 5 fights and these are the wins, but they have to be in the right order. Cause if you don't, we're not going to be able to get you there. Cause I fly people in from all over. I have people coming in from France, Brazil, coming in now. It's because that's the right fight for that fighter at the right time. Right. If you look at the fight right before UG's fight, we have Terrence Jean-Jacques, and he's actually from Florida. He's our champion and he lives in Florida. Our champions aren't in our own backyard. We're not that league, but
he's actually a very nice guy too.
He's a very nice guy. And he used to be a big guy, but he fights down. Well, he's light heavyweight now. I mean, he's 205, but I mean, he was big, less than a year ago, he's fighting at 265, I think. So, wow. And I look at him and then I'm bringing in Dwayne, Diggs. And he's from another part of the country. So maybe as a promoter, that doesn't look the best for me, or it doesn't work for me as far as ticket sales or, my local guy fighting a away guy. They're both from other parts of the country, but both of them I see. And I have to think like a matchmaker. I can't go, wow, I really like him. I can't do that. I have to think this is the right spot for Diggs right now. And this is the right spot for Jean-Jacques. Yeah. They might be in different parts of their career, but it's the right fight at the right time for each of them.
You're awesome because, I had experience way back when I didn't fight for these shows, but I was training in California, and I won't say the name of the show, but there's 2 different shows, right? And one was exactly like you, where they said, we're not going to focus just on our guys in our backyard who can sell tickets and things like that. We're going to focus on bringing people all over the place. And then it grew into and it's a major feeder show to the UFC now. And it's a great, great show. And there's another show, which was one of the pioneering shows. And they were always about like the local boys and this and that. And they're still around. But they had a lot of malfeasance in terms of the financial areas. I'm not here to call anybody out, but also it's just a show that doesn't even matter anymore. Like you can fight in it, but it doesn't even matter.
What's it called?
I'm not going to say.
It's called No Name.
Yeah. It's called No Name.
We'd get more ratings if we had more controversy.
I know, right?
He never wants to name names.
Listen, you're in MMA. I'm a guest. I could cause some controversy, but I'm not. I'm not saying it. I know who they are.
You knew. I knew.
I know exactly.
I just whispered it.
You only had to say the first 2. Right.
Yeah. And I remember training in California with guys who.
By the way, I hate their logo. Their logo.
I can't say that exactly. It's the same damn logo since 1994. The same logo.
I'll be back with that next time. You're welcome.
Yeah, it's it's just terrible. I think we're going to wrap it up. This was a great podcast. Fantastic. It's so awesome to have you on. And I'd like,
Thanks for
maybe we
having
can have her on again for each premiere show. And
100%.
And I'm just so.
I'm not a New Yorker, so it's very.
You call in?
No,
Yeah.
I'll come back.
Oh, you'll come
Because
back.
you guys have way better food than we do, for sure. But I'm not a New Yorker. I think because I've been so many different parts of the country, this is a whole entire country of its own. I've never been to a place like New York before. Ever, but I do like it.
Well, I have to say that when we went up to Massachusetts, we've only met wonderful people, and you're number one. The only issue I have is I still have trouble telling you and your twin sister apart.
So does everybody else, and I like it. But I do like it because they ask her questions. So I'll run up to her and ask her questions, and she's been with me. She's worked for me since like 200009. She filters everything. I love it.
That's funny.
It's so wonderful having you, and of course your business partner Camiar, who's sitting here together. Thank you so much.
PremierFighting.com.
Oh yes, please. Yeah, go ahead.
PremierFighting.com is the website.
PremierFighting.com. Yep.
And
support your New Yorkers. So make sure that you put either UG or Yorrick.
Oh, I think it's Y Anderson, right?
It's either I think his code's Y Anderson and then UG's is UG. He has just that short.
Just use UG.
Just UG.
UG.
Yeah.
Put all your money on Radical.
Yeah.
February 29th.
That is,
Yeah. And it's not that far from New York. You can drive up. It's an hour and 15 minutes or hour 20 minutes. And then also there's a train that goes up from Grand Central and from Penn Station too.
Well, they can watch it online.
And they can try.
You can watch it on Fight TV. What we'll do is
Fight TV.
Premier FC on Facebook. We actually don't even know the link until the week of. But you can watch it anywhere in the country outside of 25 miles from the venue.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you. And
Thank you so much.
I thank you for being
Thank you
here.
for having
but
me, guys.
also thank you for everything you do for the sport. It's you're the best promoter I've ever worked with and I've ever known. And any fighter who's out there who's looking to go, Premier FC is the place to go because they'll take care of you. They'll make sure you'll have a plan to grow. And anybody who wants to watch great fights, it's a great place to watch the what would be considered like the AAA level of fights, which still some amazing fights. And people have gone from Premier to the UFC many times. So I'm really psyched and honored to be part of the Premier FC family.
Thank you guys for having me very much.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.